Welcome to Talk Like a Man, the podcast of the Men's Center for Growth and Change.
MCGC's mission is to help men and boys realize their full potential, to love and positively connect with themselves and others.
We're your hosts, Dr. Alex Bove,
And Brother Robb Carter, MSW, will be your guides on this journey.
A series of conversations about men and masculinity, with experts in everything from alpha males to Zen masters. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, wherever and whenever you are. This is the beginning of a new journey. This is season 2 of the podcast, and very exciting news this season. We have a co-host. I guess I have a co-host. We have a co-host. I'm not sure how to say it, but I am very, very pleased to welcome Robert Carter, otherwise affectionately known as Brother Robb, to the podcast. And we thought that we'd do a little, I don't know, is this fun? I would interview him, and he's, I think, also going to interview me.
Of course.
And so we wanted to kind of introduce, I guess we're introducing Brother Robb and to some extent reintroducing me, because if you listen to our first few episodes, you may have learned a thing or two about me. I don't think I was front and center in those first few episodes.
Well, I've listened to the first few episodes, and I felt like I got a sense that you were someone who cared a lot about men.
Okay, that's fair.
And how men are living their lives. And
yeah.
And for me, that's a big reason why we're both here.
I appreciate that. Well, so I wanted to start with, on that note, what are you currently doing? How would you describe your work currently with men?
Great question. Currently, so at the Men's Center for Growth and Change, we just launched a new program, and it's titled, I love this title, Men Write, Journaling as We Change. And at the Men's Center for Growth and Change, we have 3 primary focuses: anger management counseling, domestic abuse counseling, and the healing from trauma. And if you can recall in our intro and our mission, we talk about love. So it's interesting that our mission is to help men and to look at love, actually wanting the best for and thinking the best of themselves and others, and to deal with those 3 heavy issues. These are issues that people don't talk a lot about in public, but that's what we do at the Men's Center, because for centuries, men have been the primary purveyors of violence in this nation and around the globe. So to actually do counseling around that kind of work is really, really important. And that's been my life's work for a while. So we launched a new program that will include journaling along with group therapy. And we also have partnered up with Mighty Writers, which is an organization that is designed to help literacy, learning how to read and loving reading and writing. So we realized in doing this work with men that journaling could be another reinforcer for them to gain some of the skills, knowledges, and ways to navigate some of the difficult times that they may be having with themselves and others in relationship.
So I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned, sort of the centrality of violence, of men's violence. Do you feel that that's always still a part of your work? Do you feel that it's becoming less a part of your work? Do you feel?
I think it's still central core of our work and of my work. I'm very committed and concerned about some of the things that are going on in the globe and some of the things that are going on here in Philadelphia, specifically around the issues of gun violence and around the issues of violence in general. So I wish I could say I'm cutting down a little bit on some of this work, but this work is still very much front and center in the work that I do. And our kind of gateway of doing some of the work around violence is helping men deal with being present and I'll use the word harmonious within their relationships with their significant others and themselves and friends and things like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about within themselves as almost like as a touch point.
Yeah.
You got to get that right before you can be in a relationship with someone else.
I think it's critical. I was talking to a young man the other day in group, and he said that was asking him to be. We were talking about the group being a safe space and being vulnerable, and he said, I really believe that the only people that can be truly vulnerable are women, children, and he said puppies. He said, I can't really see myself being too vulnerable and being that relaxed because I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be hurt. And this young man, I'll call him young man, he's 31 years old. And I just got really sad hearing him say that in the way he said it
Yeah.
because he was yeah, I got the sense that he was very sincere in what he believed in saying that within the group. So yeah, violence is still front and center, and some men even talk about not wanting to take off their armor, almost like it's like a jacket that they wear.
Yeah. Yeah. It made me sad hearing that.
Yeah.
When did you get started with sort of, well, I guess I should ask, when were you aware that you were doing work with men and that was the intentionality behind it, and maybe even that it might be like a career path for you?
Wow, that's a great question because I've been doing group work and starting with children years ago in the 70s. But I guess I was really aware in 95 when I was working at a program that no longer exists called Project RAP, which stood for Reduce Abuse Program. We were doing similar kinds of groups at Project RAP. It was part of a program that no longer exists, also called Family Services of Philadelphia. So doing that, I said, wow, I said, oh, so this is men's work. I was more like looking at it like, okay, this is work in the domestic violence field because we partnered up with Women Against Abuse and Lutheran Settlement House and Women Organized Against Rape. We met with them often because it was important that our relationship with our sister programs, that they knew we were kind of looking at them as standard bearers for accountability because oftentimes when I meet with the men, I'm meeting with them and not them and their partners.
Hmm.
But I have a constant refrain in my mind that helping him will help the home be safer.
So, and that these were all men's groups.
These were all men's groups. These were all men's groups in the 95. And eventually we started having co leadership, having men and women lead these groups so that men could actually see men and women partnering up and doing leadership and facilitating the group activities.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
And so that's been your primary focus, is sort of intimate partner violence groups,
Since
anger
around,
management groups as well.
yes, anger management groups as well because I think we started getting some small contracts from the city of Philadelphia to do anger management group. Like if you get a simple assault case, you may be able to plead a no contest, if you will, and take counseling as opposed to going to court or going to jail. So in these cases, they may not involve an intimate partner. It may involve somebody on the street
Hmm.
that you were fighting.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Mhm.
Season 2 of the Talk Like a Man podcast was made possible in part by a generous contribution from doctors Robert Garfield and Sandra Whipple. So, what about your own experience growing up? I mean, who modeled masculinity for you, and then what did that look like?
Wow, I think my first model of masculinity would be my father, our father, Robert Edmund Carter Sr. And he was a big guy, some nickname we called him the big guy sometime. And he's a jazz musician. I consider my father pretty cool, pretty suave, and a very, very hard worker. He worked as a truck driver for Smiths for years, but then ended up as the vice president of local 830 Teamsters Union. So he was also a band leader, so they used to rehearse at our house. And our father, on the block we grew up on, he was like one of the cooler men around. He could relate to teachers. He also could relate to some of the young guys on the street. And so he was like a model for me. And I thought he was big on responsibility, but he also enjoyed having a good time and playing music, laughing, and staying on top of us about doing our homework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about like I'm just trying to imagine my stereotypes about men of that generation. Like,
Hmm.
was he emotionally available to you, or did he model some emotionality from you?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I, for years, I remember telling this story in some of the men's group. I would tell the men, and I used to say, love you, Dad. I love you, Dad. I love you, Dad." And he would never say, "I love you" back until towards the end of his life. Like, and I want to say when he was in his 80s or maybe late 70s, then he would start saying, "I love you" back. He, and most before he would say, "Right back at you."
Yeah.
He said, "Right back at you, man." But eventually, it warmed my heart when he was able to say, "I love you" back. But what about you, Alex Bove? Because this is a partnership,
Yeah.
and I'm interviewing you, you interviewing me,
Okay.
and I love the question that you just asked me. So when did you come to the realization that your work was men's work?
That's kind of that's a really good question. And I mean, I think I have to confess that like there's parts of me that have imposter syndrome about that because my like 9 to 5, if you want
Uh-huh.
to call it that, isn't specifically men's work,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But on the other hand, I've always steered whatever work I was doing, what teaching or academia or whatever. And of course, this whole project, this Talk Like a Man
Right.
project, I've always steered it toward masculinity, men, gender
Mm-hmm.
issues. So, I mean, in terms of when did I get an awareness of that? I mean, I can tell you that for sure. It was college, undergraduate.
Say more.
Uh, well, I mean, I grew up in a little bit of like a small town, um, conservative town, and there wasn't a lot of diversity of people in
Okay.
all different ways.
Okay.
And I went off to college, undergraduate, 18 years old, and I went to, it's still not a huge college, but it was like a state school,
Where?
Florida State
Oh
University.
man, the Seminoles.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
Tallahassee.
That's yeah.
And so there, you got what 50,000 students at the time, 40,000 students at the time, and people of all different types, and so first of all, I just kind of met more people and
Mm-hmm.
experienced more of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started taking classes and I started reading, a lot of second wave feminists because this is the 1990s. So there's
Mm-hmm.
not, there's a lot of authors now who didn't even, we weren't reading back then,
Mm-hmm.
even just Simone de Beauvoir and stuff like that. And just having like a lot of feminism be really
Mm-hmm.
influential in my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me thinking about, gender in general. And then, of course, because I'm a man, I didn't really feel entitled to comment too much on femininity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, but maybe I can use some feminist methods to sort of deconstruct masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can examine masculinity. And as you probably know, I mean, men's what we might call men's studies
Mm-hmm.
has always been like a decade behind feminism.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of like the men's rights, not using the internet
Yeah,
men's
yeah,
rights, but
right.
like men's awareness,
Mm-hmm.
the men's movement, the positive men, the pro-feminist men's movement.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been about 10 years behind the feminist movement.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of feel like I was at least close to the vanguard of that,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like maybe I was thinking ahead a little bit because I'd been thinking about those issues for a while. Some of it was like in the early, okay, so let's take you back in the
Mm-hmm.
early days of the internet
Mm-hmm.
when we had these things called blogs.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I created a blog. The phrase "the two body problem."
No.
It's like in academia.
Two
It's the
body
Yeah,
problem.
it's this idea that two married people, if they're both scholars or academics, that it's hard for them to get jobs at the same university or like close together
Okay.
because universities don't usually hire like that. So
Okay.
it's called the two body problem.
Okay.
So I thought I was clever in coming up with the two body solution as the name of the blog, and she was writing more about like feminist issues and women's issues, and I was writing about men's
Okay.
issues and masculinity issues. And so we had a blog for a while, and then that kind of faded away, and then I went to school. um some time passed in between, but like I taught a lot of these kinds of things in my
Mm-hmm.
classes at the community college. Then I went to sex school, as we say, at Widener. I took the opportunity to make every class paper or assignment as much as I could to steer it in the direction of like masculinity studies,
Hmm.
men's studies, whatever I could do, any chance I got. And and I loved it so much I was like, I'll do a PhD on this. And once you do your PhD, you get to study kind of whatever you want.
Hmm.
So it was very masculinities oriented PhD. And at around that time, I got involved in the Men's Center for Growth and Change. I was fortunate enough to be invited onto the board.
Which we are very glad that you joined us. It's
Yeah.
interesting that you got that awakening at Florida State University because, just being someone who followed a lot of football, and Florida State was just this big football program, and I always just imagine just like testosterone going wild down there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and with the athletes. I think Burt Reynolds went there, a couple of other.
Yes. 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 He's a big donor. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, and I'm not gonna lie. I mean, there was definitely some of that. I mean, there
Hmm.
was a very rowdy fraternity life there. I
Hmm.
wasn't involved in it, but it was there. It was kind of a party school, although I was
Hmm.
never a party
Hmm.
person. And yeah, the football at the time, I think when I was there, the team won the national title or came real close to it one
Yeah,
of those
yeah,
times.
they may have one, and they had this real famous case that we were using, because I'm also similar to you. I teach on a college campus, and we were doing some training when freshmen came in because of course, some of the universities have issues with date rape,
Yep.
and there was a major incident at Florida State with one of their major football players, and they made a documentary film on it, and we required everyone, incoming student, to look at this film and have discussions around this film, and it was just really, really an important thing to do at the time.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that was a little after that was way after my time on campus,
Mm-hmm.
but I
Mm-hmm.
certainly remember that
Yeah,
case.
'cause I think the guy is still he's still in the NFL.
I guess I was a little bit shielded from some of that because I mean I was a liberal arts person.
Yeah.
I was at the time I thought I was going to be this poet, this sort of writer.
Oh, so we had that in common. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm a
yeah.
poet too.
There you go. And yeah, and so I think maybe it was sort of I got involved in more the arts and that kind of stuff. So I wasn't as involved in that aspect of life
Mm-hmm.
on campus. But no, I mean there's no question. There's no question that was happening
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the beauties about us getting together is, in fact, this is a statement often used, is the beauty of the human garden is in our difference. So our differences will come together in doing this podcast, and also, our similarities. And one of the things that I'd like to know, when you say that you like you called Widener the sex school, and you often say um, masculinities, and sometimes I use manhood. What's the difference between, for you, manhood and masculinities?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, and I mean, it's hard. It's kind of increasingly hard to answer in certain ways,
Hmm.
right? So like the the best framing that I've heard, well, I mean, I can tell you just straight up, I mean, masculinity is usually like the set of behaviors and traits, not traits like innate
Hmm.
inborn traits, but
Hmm.
just pe- things that people demonstrate that seem like traits,
Hmm.
right? That are sort of more social,
Hmm.
those aspects that we name masculine,
Hmm.
right? That's masculinity. And to me, like we can separate that from the body of the person who's exhibiting those
Hmm.
behaviors or
Hmm.
traits, right? So it doesn't matter what your anatomy is. It doesn't matter what your hormones are. It doesn't matter the sex you were assigned at birth. It doesn't matter any of that. Everyone can express or not express masculinity to a
Hmm.
certain extent. And then within masculinity, it's not one thing anymore. So like the field, so far as I know, and I think I'm still up to date on that, the field talks about masculinities plural
Hmm.
to reflect that idea.
Hmm.
That there are queer masculinities, there's trans masculinity,
Hmm.
um, there are masculinities of color.
Hmm.
Men of color experience masculinity
Hmm.
differently. And so there's not really one
Hmm.
masculinity, even though maybe culturally we might think about it that way.
Hmm.
But like in reality, there aren't. And that was the premise of Talk Like a Man,
Hmm.
was multiple masculinities. Like the goal of the project is to say, no, there isn't one way to be a man. There isn't one way to be masculine,
And
you
that and
know.
that and to be honest with you, that was one of my draws to want to do this program with you, because in my upbringing, a lot of my focus and a lot of my rearing was around the word manhood, and and I really liked the title "Talk Like a Man" because that conjures up a lot of things for me. And then some my work with men, like even the statement I made earlier about the young man who said that he actually believes that, wow, that he didn't think he could be vulnerable, and that the only people he felt that really were deserving of being able to be vulnerable and to feel safe was women, children, and he said puppies, and it's like,
Yeah,
wow,
puppies, I
that's
know.
kind of sad that he would feel that trapped, that he couldn't relax. But then I understand it when guys that I've worked with say, particularly guys who've been in certain situations where they haven't been safe, let's say prisons, or sometimes even on the playground where
Hmm.
there's a lot of um, testing going on around who's the toughest. So not feeling that they can relax or kind of take their shield down a little bit to feel safe enough to say, yeah, I'm hurt. Or I, even the other night, just talking about uh, Jason Kelsey, who was Philadelphia Eagle, who just retired, and he was bawling
Yep.
on TV, just crying. And I brought this up in group, and one of the guys said, "Yeah, well, he can do that because he's a famous guy and he's got this going for him. But I can't cry. I'm not going to be crying in front of people. There's a whole lot that might come with that I wouldn't want. But he can do that because, he shielded by his celebrityhood. Now he didn't use that word,
Yeah.
but I got what he meant.
Well, not just by celebrity, but a particular type of celebrity, right?
Right,
I mean, he's
right,
he's a football player.
right,
You can't
right,
get more masculine than
right,
that. So I
right.
mean, yeah, and no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a big thing, right? So the most the biggest beefiest guys or the guy firefighters, people who work in these
Mm-hmm.
fields, even military men to some extent, they kind of have permission to maybe exhibit vulnerability
Yeah.
or even sometimes to play with gender roles a little bit in ways that other men can't necessarily feel that they can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, because the thing about masculinity, I know people get mad when some men get mad when people say, masculinity is fragile, but we're not saying that individual men are necessarily fragile. What we're
Mm-hmm.
saying is that the edifice of masculinity can crumble
Mm-hmm.
with the smallest thing
Mm-hmm.
at any time. It can crumble, right? And you're never safe. If what you want is masculinity, you're never safe. That's the thing. It's a constant state of anxiety because anything you do, right? If you talk a certain way, if you walk a certain way, if you paint your fingernails,
Mm-hmm.
if you kiss another man in a way that's, I don't know, not masculine, because I
Mm-hmm.
guess there are some masculine ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you embrace your child in a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
right? You
Wow.
lose it instantly. And I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you an anecdote from my life that demonstrates this. My grandmother, my father's mother, who was dear, I mean, like dear to everyone. She was like the sweetest woman, I mean, never a gentler soul did you meet. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she was just a lovely one. I have such fond memories of her.
Mm-hmm.
When she passed away, we were at her funeral and I was there. My father was there. My uncles and aunts were there. Most of the family managed to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave a eulogy for her because, again, I was really close to her. And I cried the whole time. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I cried through everything. I cried before, I cried during the eulogy, I cried afterward. And my uncle's wife, I heard her. She didn't say this to my face, but I heard her kind of off, to the side, basically like berating me. Like, I can't believe the way he's crying, blah, 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 blah. And basically like demeaning me,
Mm-hmm.
for crying
Mm-hmm.
at my grandmother's funeral. I mean, I was brokenhearted,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, so somehow I guess I lost all masculinity in that moment in her eyes. And
Ye-
she didn't like it, which tells you a little bit about some of my family of origin, but
Well, I think there's still some of that, in the culture. There's still some of that where like this young man said about crying. I think, I have a few stories, about men crying. I mean, as you were talking about, you said about embracing your child. I remember one time I was with one of my mentees, and this is a grown man in his late 20s, and he had a child who was about 4 years old, I think 3 or 4 years old, and the adult mentee of mine, his father was there, and he introduced me to his father, and he was with his little son, and he actually picked his son up, and he was holding his son, and his father said, "Yo, you need to put him down. He's big enough to be standing on his own."
Hmm.
And my man, he looked at his father. He said, "Dad, I got this. It's okay. You know, it's okay. I can hold him. He's only 4. He's gonna have enough time to stand on his own. But while I can still hold him, I'm gonna still hold him." And I thought that was so um, courageous, but important for him to say and do.
Yeah.
And that's and him and my connection with him and the work that we were doing, I believe, had a lot to do with him coming to that. This was at the time, and I was doing what I call peaceful posse work, where I was working with young boys. I'm teaching them skills so that they wouldn't become abusive men. I called them peace skills, and
Hmm.
we would have group once a week, and I was kind of breaking down the curriculum that we were using in some of these domestic abuse counseling sessions and anger management, figuring that if I could share some of these with some of these young boys, that maybe not see some of them down the road of peace in adulthood, or at least maybe they would have a more healthier way of engaging other people.
That's such a beautiful story. I'm just thinking about like 3 generations in that story, you know, that the son is holding his son, and then the way that he sort of stood his ground, but
Mm-hmm.
like respectfully,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
sort of taught his father a little something
Mm-hmm.
about that,
Yeah.
and what he was modeling for his son, who,
Mm-hmm.
at 4 years old probably wasn't super aware of, but
Mm-hmm.
you're I was aware at 4,
Mm-hmm.
of things. And yeah, and I think about, like, this, the studies that uh, parents don't hold
Oh
their
yeah.
boys
Right.
as
Yeah.
much or as
That,
often. They let
that's
them
right.
cry more,
That's
right?
right.
And then of course we all have stories. I shouldn't assume, but I'm guessing you have stories of, like, you're on the playground, you fall, you scrape your knee, and it's shake it off, get up,
Oh,
you know.
when I worked in preschool, I worked at Nana Bear's Loving Care Daycare Center, 53rd and Market, no longer exists, and we would take the children to the playground every day if possible. And we had a bunch of children. They were playing on the monkey bars. I remember little Erica was 4, and she fell down from the monkey bars, and she's crying, ah! And I ran over there, picked her up, hugged her, and she's, and I'm hugging her, telling her she's gonna be all right. And I think almost like a month later, Jonathan fell from that same spot, and I stood about 20 feet away from Jonathan, and I said, "Jonathan, suck it up. You all right?" And I hit my hand on my chest. "You be all right?" And I tell that story because I'm the culprit in the story.
Mm.
And in playing that story back, it's like, wow, look at what Jonathan didn't get. And look at what Erica got. Erica got to be soothed. She got to be comforted. She got to be told she was going to be all right. She got permission to cry. Jonathan got none of that. Like he was told, and I literally watched this 4-year-old boy, because they were at the same age, try to make his tears go back up in his head. And I tell that story at different settings with men. And I've told that story at halfway houses, and I remember some men's group, they would say, "Well, you want to make Jonathan a little punk? What
Hmm.
you think? You did the right thing." And then I would out ask, "Well, doesn't Jonathan have feelings?" I said, "So Jonathan doesn't get permission to cry?"
Yeah.
And
Wasn't he hurting?
what? Yeah, and they would go back. We would go back and forth, but oftentimes that would be the pushback.
Yeah.
That would be the pushback, and I would love telling this story to see people's reaction to the story, but it also kind of but a great, like, kind of scratch mark on my heart, because I was the person who initiated that to Jonathan. I mean, and Jonathan, I just still remember his face Oh my God, he would cry every day coming to the daycare center. So
No, I can
yeah,
see the way in your body language. I can see how affecting
yeah.
that
It
is
was a
still
long time
for you.
ago, but it's very poignant in my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to believe and I do believe that there's progress. I do
Mm-hmm.
believe that men are improving in these areas,
Mm-hmm.
younger men. But I also work with college students every day,
Mm-hmm.
and it's amazing to me sometimes. I'll sit down in a conference with a student and a young man, and you know, it will be like week 10 of the semester, and he's struggling and he's failing, and he hasn't asked for help. And I'm like talking to him saying, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not even advocate for yourself, but like it's okay to need help. It's okay to
Right,
ask for help.
right.
And it's eye opening when you realize that he just he can succeed academically. What's holding him back has nothing to do with
Mm-hmm.
what's in his intellect.
Mm-hmm.
It has everything to do with, I guess, in a way, what's in his heart, but not in a. I don't mean that like negative. I'm saying like not. He's not willing to ask for help.
I hear it a lot in the groups of the young men I work with. It's I, and they'll say it point blank. I feel like I don't need to ask for help. I'm not going to ask for help. I'll figure it out. I'm not going to ask for help. My wife's good friend called her, and he's retired police officer, and he was talking about he just his ex is very very sick, and he was talking about many of his friends on the police force and how Philadelphia has this great employee benefit for the police officers, and how a lot of police officers don't go to the doctors or to the dentist, or don't take care of the medical stuff, don't ask for help, you know.
Yeah,
And men are notorious for waiting too late. I have a number of really close friends who will say out loud, I'm not going to the dentist. I think the dentist, a good friend of mine since childhood, is, I'm looking at this guy and he's like in his early, like late 60s. I'm like, Bruce, why you don't go? You don't have no teeth. What are you doing? What are you doing? Just a retired employee of the Navy. He's got all this, and he just says, I'm not going to the dentist. I'm like, okay, okay. I don't understand it, but
yeah. Family of origin stuff. Like there were a lot of men in my family who did not seek out medical care that they obviously and urgently needed, and suffered a lot of consequences. And I never really interrogated them about it,
mm,
but my suspicion is that it's just, they just didn't think that they could, that
mm,
it wasn't what men do,
mm.
that kind of thing. And it's like, well, I mean, okay. I guess if we want to die earlier and be unhealthy and
Because we're leading that
yeah,
statistic.
I mean, we can keep doing that, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, you
Mm.
know.
I'm thinking right now about how much fun and how I'm enjoying us going back and forth, and some of the things that we're saying, and how rich it's going to be for us to interview people that's going to be coming in the coming podcasts. But before I jump the gun a little bit, I want to ask you a little bit more. Um, when in your childhood and kind of coming up, who were some of your key role models?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think I want to say, well, I don't even just think I want to say, it's my memory is that I had two main masculinity role models, and they were really different in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, and I want to say, like, I want to be really clear because I think they both taught me certain things,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my father was kind of like a self-made man.
Mm-hmm.
He came from poverty. You know, what we would call like Section 8 housing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, really, I mean, two kids in each, or four kids, I think, in the room, and then
Mm-hmm.
the tiny little house, and like all this kind of stuff. And he, from the age of like 12, he had a paper route,
Mm-hmm.
and he worked to for his older brother. So his older brother, he basically worked to send his older brother through college. Then he worked himself, and then he got married and had me and my brother, and continued to work as a breadwinner for the family. And so, my dad was just like hardworking man.
Mm-hmm.
Go to work all day, come home, and I don't want to say like he didn't have moments of sort of tenderness and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, but I mean, he was just a guy who worked.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught me a lot about that, the
Mm-hmm.
importance of work, the importance of um, sticking through things, that kind of stuff. My grandfather was like the tortured artist.
Mm.
You know, so again, I told you that my grandfather, he, he's in that household with like, it's Section 8 housing.
Mm.
He laid on his back and painted the ceiling of their like government subsidized housing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like painted stars and like, like an oil painting like Michelangelo or something, right? He was a gardener, he played the violin, he sang, he was and he was quirky, he had a printing press in the basement and all this kind of stuff. So it's just so like from him, I think I got a lot of my like artistic
Mm-hmm.
nature and like my dreamer, the part of me that's a dreamer and an idealist, I got
Mm-hmm.
from him. But he wasn't like a worker,
Mm-hmm.
he was just off in his own world,
Mm-hmm.
And so like I guess those were the two big contrasts.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean it's been a struggle in a way because, I see both the positive and the negative of both of those
Mm-hmm.
sides in a lot of ways. And I like to think that I took the best of both, but I don't know.
Listen, I think as we grow up, we're just so busy just growing up, sometimes not being aware, but just living it. As I asked you the question, I was also thinking about myself, and I talked a little bit about my father and him
Yeah, I was
being a
going to ask you.
jazz musician. And it was just then things that he worked as a truck driver for years, and he always had more than one job. And jazz was his passion. Playing music was his passion. He was the band leader, and he played the piano. And so he taught me a lot about about men. He would because he I remember we would talk when I was like a young adult. He would say it's hard to keep a band together, because of the different personalities that people had, and how you had to really work hard to try to make the team work. And he also lamented about his father. His father, our papa, was an even harder working man. He worked on a railroad for 44 years, and when he passed away, in his honor, I decided not to call out sick for a whole year, because I found out that he worked 44 years on a railroad and only took 4 sick days.
Wow.
I said, wow, that's like one sick day every 11
I
years.
know, I know. That's what I'm thinking. Wow.
And he was outside working on the tracks, and he was someone, my Pop Edwin Franklin Carter. He was someone who just he worked hard, at a third grade education, was smart as a whip, was a block captain on his block. I mean, he made sure they put trees on the Delancey Street. It's just so those two were really important to me. And my older brother Edwin, even though my older brother Edwin was only 10 months older than me, I looked up to him because he was very studious. We nicknamed him the professor, and so I looked up to my brother. He's no longer here, but those three were very important in terms of even now who I am today.
Now here's the thing. This is one of the things I love about our partnership with this venture is that, we're from a little bit different generations.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so like what was in the ether? Like what was in the popular culture for you growing up as far as masculinity?
Oh, wow. It was in either.
Like, I don't know,
Yeah,
movies,
a lot.
music,
Oh,
that kind of
well, I
stuff.
grew up, so I'm born May 30th, 1952, and raised right here in Philadelphia. I've never lived anywhere. I've visited many, many places, but I always lived in Philadelphia, and for the most part, West Philadelphia. And in my coming up, the big things were music. Music, dancing, live music. Um, in fact, we had a lot of parties in the yard, block parties, and my coming up, I remember in the eighth grade, we was partying, graduation. If you didn't have James Brown at the party, then you were missing something because he kept it on the beat. So music was really, really important, and there was some toughness in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has toughness to it that oftentimes you can get caught up and get hurt. So we did have gang war, and so you had to be really careful some of the places that you went through. So that was in the ether. And my father was very keen on that. And I had it was three boys of three boys and one girl. My father was very sharp on making sure that we did not join a gang.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
he stayed on us and we stayed busy. I had a paper route at 11, I think, 11 years old, 12 years old. At one time, I was delivering the Bulletin and the Inquirer. So you know, I take after my father and my grandfather in terms of working. I've always kind of worked a couple of jobs, kind of kept things going. And the music was always big coming up.
What about popular
Entertainment,
culture?
popular
Like in
culture.
terms of who were the masculine role models? Who were
Oh,
the
it was Johnny Wayne, Johnny
okay,
Wayne.
yep, yep.
That guy was big. We watched westerns. In fact, me and my brothers, we would watch Bonanza. We identified with the Cartwrights. We were the Carters.
Okay.
So it was three of them, and it was before my younger brother Jerry came, who we're a lot older than. We kind of modeled ourselves after the Cartwrights. We came up where we literally got toy guns. I remember getting the Rifleman gun of Chuck Connors that was big.
Hmm.
Sports was kind of big, but we played sports more than we looked at sports. TV wasn't used. We literally were told to go outside and don't come back. So we would be outside playing most of the day. I kind of feel sorry for some of the young children because some of them don't get to go outside and just kind of like play.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
some
There's a movement now, so-called free range parenting, that's sort of like more to allow children to kind of have more of that, experience
it
of
would be, I
going
think it would be
outside
great, yeah,
for a
so they can
while,
go
coming home,
outside
that kind of thing.
and be safe though. Go
Well, yeah,
outside
of
and be
course.
safe.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
then the thing about free range parenting that has to be acknowledged is it's a great idea if you live in the suburbs
Right.
and you're white and you're
Yes.
safe
Right.
and like all this other kind of stuff. But for a young man of color in the situation you're describing, I mean,
And some of these
it may
neighborhoods are
not always
tough.
be safe for you to.
Listen, the group we had today, we were meeting, and some of the young guys were talking about it was major incident on SEPTA bus stop, and where was gun violence, and a student out of a high school that my youngest daughter graduated from, MOTEP, and young student was targeted and was killed.
Oh,
So
geez.
their ability to have a safe place and have fun is different. So that's 2024. I, my era was 52, 62, 72.
Right.
And so it's so the context is different, so the human being will be different, and just being able to do this work for as long as have done it, I've come to appreciate that it's not, we got to do both. We got to do work in terms of helping the human beings, but we got to deal with the context of where the human environment. We got to help these environments become better. Poverty is a major form of violence,
Yeah.
and people can survive, and some good things come out of very difficult situations. But I I contend that there'd be a lot more healthier things coming out of more healthy environments.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I sometimes get up in, cloud cuckoo land, and like I'm thinking about like the top levels of Maslow's hierarchy,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah,
Um,
self-actualization is great. Teaching young boys that they can be any kind of masculinity they want is great, but like but there are many young boys living in situations where they don't have the luxury of self-actualization. So I always try to be mindful of,
Hmm.
that I do have this idealist worldview, and
Hmm.
I'm not going to change that in terms
Hmm.
of what I want for the future,
Hmm.
but I try not to get too frustrated that change is slow because, like you said, the world is not necessarily built for the kind of change that I think either of us really want.
Yeah, and I think we can. I think we have to believe and have to begin to try to construct it. You know, I think the mind is very important. I think our imagination sometimes is even more important, and I often do imagination exercises in my class. And one of the classes I teach at, was teaching at Penn was American racism. I asked people to think about an environment where there wasn't no isms, no sexism, no racism, of this and that. And oftentimes the students give me so much kickback because they can't even imagine.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
said, well, that's
Yeah,
where
what does
we're
that look
going.
like? Yeah.
I said, that's where we're losing, because if we can't imagine it, it's going to be hard for it to come to fruition. So I'm asking people to continue to use their imagination so we can go places that we can't see now, but we would like to exist now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I actually wanted to ask you a question that all the time I've known you, I've never asked you.
Hmm.
But, you said affectionately known as Brother Rob.
Hmm.
Was that something that someone gave you, bestowed upon you, the honorific of Brother Rob?
Yeah, the
Or,
teachers at the daycare center, the teachers at Nana Bears, because they literally because you could they at the time we definitely weren't calling adults. We weren't allowing the children to call us by our first name.
okay.
That was out. And so everyone was Nana Relinda or Nana Ann or Nana Jane. They said, "Oh, Brother Rob, you could be Nana Rob." I'm like, "Nope, nope, nope, nope." We had to come up with something. So, okay, you want to go with brother? That's kind of, what about Brother Rob? I'm like, yeah, I'll call myself Brother Rob, works for me. And then I found out from my father that when he was young, they called him brother because there wasn't many females in his household. He was like, he was the only child, number one, but he didn't have a whole lot of male cousins, a lot of female cousins. So they just called him brother, not even Rob or not even Bobby. I was called Bobby coming up. He was
Okay.
called brother.
Okay.
And I said, oh, wow, okay, so I'm a junior. I said, that makes sense. So I've been affectionately known as Brother Rob since the 80s,
Why
1980s.
didn't you
Yeah.
want to be called Nana?
Why? Because I wasn't a nana and I
Yeah.
didn't want that identity. I
Okay.
wanted the brother as that
Okay.
identity. That was really important for me to be a to be the brother Rob. And I also look at it in a spiritual sense. I consider myself a brother, wanting to be a brother to people on the globe. I went to Catholic school and I was taught by the Jesuits, and they were called brothers, and they
Okay.
were kind of held in esteem. So for me, brother was a much more comfortable fit.
Yeah, I've always thought of it as almost like you said, as a spiritual
Hmm.
title.
Hmm.
I've always thought, even though I knew that you weren't formally a
Right,
monk,
right,
but
right.
it had that kind of monasterial, aspect. I thought,
I
because
appreciate
well, because
that.
again, because you're a far more spiritual person than I am. That's the
Thank
thing you
you.
bring. That's the thing you bring to this project. That I come
Thank you.
from. I, yeah, that's just not really a thing that's deeply in my life, but it is for you, and it's
It
wonderful.
is. It's very, very much a part of who I am.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel very comfortable, and I'm looking forward to us engaging some wonderful, wonderful guests and exploring what it means to them when they hear the term "talk like a man."
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sort of reluctant. I want to do like a preview, but I mean, we can't always guarantee who's going to come on for sure.
Right.
But I guess I can just tease a little that we have some people, we have some exciting people,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to really have like a good diversity of
Mm-hmm.
topics.
From all fields, from
Yeah.
academia, from people who are doing the direct work, from
medical
from the
doctor.
medical field.
Yeah, which is somebody I haven't talked to yet. So that'll be. I'm
Mhm.
very excited about that. I really
Mhm.
hope we can get him, and then because then otherwise we're gonna this conversation's gonna make us look. We're gonna have egg on our face
Well,
6 weeks from now
we'll
or
be good.
8 weeks
We'll be
from
good
now.
because we got a few people lined up that I know our audience is going to be delighted to hear some of the ideas that they have and some of the work that they actually been doing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, and I think we're going to learn more about each other, and I think some questions will come up that'll lead us down those roads.
I look forward to the questions, hearing them, answering them, and asking them.
Well, I'm going to ask you the final question I always ask everybody. Is there something that you would have wanted me to ask you about that I didn't ask you about?
Yeah. What other identities are important to me?
Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you that then.
Okay. Husband, grandfather, uncle, yeah, professor, friend, a spiritual being having a human experience.
Wow. I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And Alex, we got a nice road to dance down.
Oh yeah, there you go. There you go. I thought you were gonna say, yeah, dance. I like dance down. I was thinking it had to be musical, poetic, something like that. I was trying to come up with something to drum down.
Oh, that's true too.
You
I do
know,
drum.
I
I am an
know, I
artist.
know
I do
you're into that.
perform, and I do like drumming and
Or
you
to
know,
jam too, because
and the
like I
jam
play
to
bass,
dance.
so
You play the get
Oh,
out.
I play the bass a
I
little bit.
didn't know that.
Well, I'm not very good.
Oh well, we'll make it work.
You
We'll make it
know,
work. You just get a few
we
licks,
got
and we'll
two
make
parts of a
it.
trio.
Yeah,
We're 2/3 of the way there. If Nathan plays guitar, I think we're golden.
we're good. And you play the bass. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I have a band, the Unity, and we've been performing for the last 15 or so years, and we do a lot of performance at the University of Penn, some cafe houses, and just me, Dominic Cartwright, and Kitsy Waterson, and we mostly do acoustics, and we believe our message is just as important as the rhythms that we play.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, and then back one of our lines I want to kind of like end with, and that is it's called Fertile Life, and it's the ground is moist. The time is now for all the good inside us to shine out, co-creating a reality of everything good. Never forget who you are. For the stars can shine in your heart, and a river flows from each idea that you have. For your ideas create all sorts of things. Fertile life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everybody for listening. We will be back. It's podcast land, so I want to say how many weeks. We'll be back next time you listen to this podcast.
Yes. To find out more about the Men's Center for Growth and Change, or to make a donation, visit menscenterphilly.org.
Nathan Karuna produces this podcast. Our theme music is by Lee Rosevear.
For more information about the Talk Like a Man project, go to talklikeaman.net.